The Subcommittee on Defense will come to order. This morning, the committee will receive testimony on the posture of the National Guard and Reserve components in their fiscal year 2020 budget request. This will be a two-panel hearing. Panel 1 recognizes the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Panel 2 will recognize the Reserve component chiefs from the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force Reserves. I would encourage all members to stay for both panels. Our witness for Panel 1 is General Joe Lengel, Chief of the National Guard Bureau. We are pleased to welcome the General, a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General, welcome back to the subcommittee for your fourth, and I bet from your perspective, thank goodness, final hearing as Chief. Yes, as you are retiring later this year, all of us really do wish you the best of luck and do thank you for a very good life of service to this country. This subcommittee has provided the Reserve component with significant resources through the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Account, an appropriation which is not included in the President's budget request, as well as additional funding for the counter-drug operations, Humvee modernization, helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, and more. We are looking forward to hearing about the importance of this investment in the 54 states and territorial Guard organizations. However, we would like to cover all aspects of funding for the Guard and Reserve today, to include your request for funding in the military personnel and operations and maintenance accounts. With that, again, I thank you for appearing today. We will ask you to proceed and present a summarized statement in a moment, but first I would recognize Mr. Kelfer for a statement he has.
Thank you, Chairman Wisłowski, and I'd like to welcome General Langell back to the subcommittee. Since this will likely be your final appearance before us prior to your retirement, I want to join my colleagues in thanking you for your nearly 40 years of service to our nation. And I know you and Sally are probably looking forward to getting the heck out of here and heading back to Texas, so happy travels. I also know that I speak for all the members and staffers who have worked with you when I say we'll all miss you. You've done a fantastic job. As we gather here today, our nation is even more dependent on our more than 450,000 citizen airmen and soldiers more than ever. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I close my opening remarks.
Thank you very much. General, your full statement is in the record. You may proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Wisłowski, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, it is an honor for me to be here today on behalf of the men and women of the National Guard. For nearly 4 years, I have served as Chief of the National Guard Bureau, and I am both proud and humbled by the service of our National Guard. Today's 450,000 Guard members are the most professional, dedicated, and capable soldiers and airmen I have served with in my 40-year career. We do tremendous things every day to support our country in the warfight, in the homeland, and building partnerships around the world. Our men and women of the National Guard do not serve alone, and I would like to take this moment to thank the families and the employers of those who support them. I would also like to thank the members of this subcommittee for their continued support of the National Guard. This includes especially your support of the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Account, which helps ensure our long-term readiness, lethality. It helps modernize our force, helps fund our domestic critical duties items, and help sustain and build the National Guard capability. In the past year, the National Guard served on every continent, in every combatant command, in 70 countries. As we speak here today, more than 40,000 members of the National Guard are deployed or on duty somewhere at home or around the world. Our men and women of the Guard are seeing combat, what we are ultimately trained and equipped and prepared for. We are operational force, providing strategic depth to the United States Army, the United States Air Force, and now the United States Space Force. As America's primary domestic military response force, the National Guard remains engaged here at home. On any given day, approximately 10,000 soldiers and airmen are serving Homeland Defense, Homeland Security, and domestic operations here at home. As state and local governments find themselves under attack by cyber assailants, the National Guard's nearly 4,000 cyber warriors are ready to respond at the request of leadership in their states. As our communities find themselves battling wildfires in California or floods in Missouri or earthquakes in Puerto Rico, the National Guard continues to live up to our motto of always ready and always there. The National Guard supports the Department of Homeland Security along our southwest border. Today, approximately 2,500 National Guard members from 21 states are assisting our partners as they help secure the border in Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas. Our success in both the warfight and the homeland is a result of our unique partnerships at all levels: international, federal, state, and local. Key among these are the relationship we've built through the State Partnership Program. These state-to-nation relationships facilitate security cooperation based on mutual trust and cultural appreciation. Today, with this important program, we now have 84 partnerships, with more on the way. This directly supports a key tenet of the National Defense Strategy of strengthening alliances and building partnerships. The National Guard has accomplished much over the past year, and I'm proud of our soldiers and airmen who have boldly taken on every challenge they've faced. We are truly a 21st century National Guard. We have evolved much since 1636. We have transformed even more since 9/11. We are a unit-based, unit-equipped, surge-to-war reserve component. We must adapt, change, and prepare for the future. We must continue to make strides in readiness, investing in our people, and continuing to innovate. Readiness means we must be competitive in every domain. Traditionally, that's meant land, air, and sea, but today, competitive domains include space and cyberspace. Since 1995, the Air National Guard has supported the Air Force in the space domain, from monitoring missile threats to providing space intelligence. As space missions transition from the Air Force to the Space Force, it is imperative that the National Guard remain aligned with the active components we support. The Air National Guard is aligned with the Air Force, the Army Guard is aligned with the Army, and I suspect we need a Space Guard aligned with the Space Force. Furthermore, we must continue to invest in our greatest weapon and most valuable asset, our people. We must give them the training, the equipment, the full-time support they need to seamlessly be interoperable with our active components. We must be able to recruit, retain the right people, and have the 21st century National Guard that reflects the communities where we serve. We ask much of our servicemen and women today, and I ask for your continued support on your behalf. Chairman Wisławski, I wish you much health and happiness in your upcoming retirement, and thank you for your years of service to our nation. Ranking Member Calvert and members of this subcommittee, thank you for your opportunity to testify to you today. I appreciate your support of the National Guard, and I look forward to all of your questions.
General, thank you very much. As I may have told you when we met, some people inquire as to why I decided not to run for re-election, and I told them if you're not going to be around next year, it's not worth coming back.
Thanks, sir.
Normally, I defer my questions, but in this instance, I would like to ask the first question, and then I'll turn to Mr. Calvert, and would have a short statement. Congress started appropriating funding for the National Guard and Reserve components through the National Guard and Reserve Equipment account in 2001 as a response to the decreases in Guard and Reserve equipment funding, even while procurement budgets increased for the department. For the past 19 fiscal years, Congress added this appropriation in an attempt to ensure the equipment needs of the Guard and Reserve components are met and readiness levels can be achieved. Additional funding for aircraft or vehicles has also been provided in appropriations bills, with the funding specifically noted in the bill or report for a specific Guard or Reserve component. Last month, no news to anyone on the committee, the entire fiscal year 20 appropriations on $1.3 billion for the account, funding for the Humvee modernization, as well as funding for aircraft specifically appropriated for the Guard and Reserve, was transferred from the Department of Defense to the Department of Homeland Security for the purpose of building a wall. The department did not consult with Congress prior to this transfer. In testimony last week to the House Armed Services Committee, the Secretary of Defense defended the decision to use funding specifically appropriated for the Guard and Reserve by relying on his chair of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, for his analysis. General Milley said he was asked to analyze the move and concluded national security would not be severely impacted. In short, he said, what I said was that this reprogramming of $3.8 billion was not a significant immediate strategic negative impact to the overall defense of the United States. Quoting General Milley further, it's a 0.5% of the overall budget. So I can't in conscience say it's significant. The two problems I have with that is I think $3.8 billion is a huge amount of money. I think $1.3 billion is a huge amount of money. And maybe 0.5% is not much out of $5. It's a lot of money out of $700 billion. The question I would have essentially is, were you consulted? What programs and purchases were intended to be procured? And what is going to be the impact of the transfer of these funds, General?
Chairman, thank you for the question. It's an important question. If I can say, was I consulted? I would tell you the answer to that question would be no. I was not consulted prior to the decision being made to transfer the funds. I was asked about it prior to the funds being transferred, and the comment you referenced to General Milley there about, and we were asked, do we disagree with this statement? The chairman said this will not seriously compromise the military capability of the DoD to defend the United States at the strategic level. And when he further explained, that means we lose a war if we don't get this money. Does anyone in this room think that taking this amount of money exceeds that threshold? I did not think that it exceeded that threshold. But I will tell you, the INGREA account is incredibly important to the National Guard and the reserves. This year, for us, it was $790 million. That is $790 million that is less, that we will spend less on predominantly two things. In the Air Guard, we predominantly use this money to make our platforms more lethal, more modern, more survivable than they would otherwise be if we did not have the INGREA funds to do it. In the Army Guard, we buy predominantly critical dual-use equipment with INGREA money. Things that it is our only source of money, really, to buy things that only the National Guard does, things that buy us things for domestic operations, things like buckets for helicopters that put out fires, things like communications systems for our chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear sets that are predominantly in the Guard, things that are communication suites, test sets for men and women of the Guard to do training on. These are things that would never be bought for us, for the Army Guard, by the United States Army. And on the air side, they are things that are done for platforms that usually the Air Force no longer has. So older model F-16s, which only reside in the Guard, C-130H models, which only reside in the Guard and Reserve, systems that would not meet the threshold for Air Force modernization activities. So this money is very important to us. And over the next 3 years, between now and 2023, we have a very good history. As you went back to 2001, I take INGREA back to the early 1980s, predominantly. 1983 or 4, we began getting INGREA. And it made our platform more lethal, more able to go to war, safer for men and women to fly in combat. And so this money that we don't have, at the very best case, it gets deferred a following year. Things that we were going to do, such as modernize our threat warning systems, modernize our infrared systems on our F-15s, new avionics in C-130s. Those types of things will now wait a year at a minimum, and that assumes that this committee continues to support us further with the INGREA funds down the road. So I was surprised that they took the money, and it's going to have a near-term material impact on our Air Guard for sure, and it will affect our commodities that we're going to have to deal with the domestic operations portfolio and the Army Guard for sure as well.
Thank you very much, General. Mr. Calvert?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As you know, I support the border security, the so-called wall. However, this reprogramming activity is troublesome. I think that all of us, I don't care which side of the aisle that you're on, if this kind of activity is to continue, we are going to, as members of Congress, lose control of the appropriating process. And preface this by also saying that there's money in the FY20 and the FY21 bill to more than adequately continue to build the border wall through this year and next year. So I've never been really told by various folks why this had to be done in the first place, and know how we found out about it. At least how I found about it was a Wall Street Journal reporter running up behind me to let me know that this was taking place, which was not a great way to communicate. So I just wanted to let the chairman know that I agree that this kind of reprogramming has to end. I mean, there's going to be a future president at some point, maybe President Sanders, who may want to create a national emergency and move money into Health and Human Services. Who knows? I mean, but that's not for the White House to determine. That's for Congress. So anyway, with that, Mr. Chairman.
I'm done with my questions. Mr. Keller, do you have a question at this time?
No, I have a question. Oh, if we're ready for a question, I'll move on to that. Yes, okay. General, I know that we're expecting a report in a month or two detailing how the Space Force will incorporate the Reserve and the National Guard Force. And as you know, the Guard has about 1,500 personnel, many of which are in my home state of California because of our interaction in space, especially in Los Angeles, El Segundo area. In many ways, I've always felt the Guard complements the mission of the Space Force, and in areas where you have private industry attracting the best talent, the Guard is a great way for these patriotic folks to serve their country at the same time as staying involved in the businesses they work at. And understanding you can't get ahead of the report, what role do you see the Guardsmen playing in the space mission?
Sir, thank you for the question. I think that, as I said in my remarks, the National Guard has been in a space mission for a long time. We have been doing mission in space for the United States Air Force for 25 years, since 1995. There are space units in 7 states, and the territory of Guam now is standing up a space unit. So I believe a couple of things. One is, I believe that one of the things that's best about us is we are aligned, and what we do so well is we mirror the culture of our parent service. So there was only one standard to be a soldier in the Army. There's only one standard to be an airman in the Air Force, and there will be a standard to be a space warrior in the future Space Force. And I believe that it's important that the space capability currently in the Air National Guard should move into the Space Force the same time that all the other space capability that's in the Air Force when it moves to the Space Force. We can't do that unless there's a component for us to move into. And thus, for over a year, I've been advocating for the creation of a Space National Guard component. I know it's still under discussion. General Raymond is looking at the U.S. Space Force and how to build this 21st service organization, and I support that. But we have been looking at the reserve component construct for a year, and the Air Force has done a internal study analysis in Air Force A9 that examined various options. And I believe that the creation of a Space National Guard is well postured for all the things that you say. As space moves into the commercial sector, it will posture itself, and there will be opportunity there to leverage that commercial sector and build reserve units. And the other thing different about the National Guard is we are the only reserve component deployable force structure in the space business. We have units that are unit built, unit equipped, that have deployed to the Middle East, that have deployed into the Pacific, that do missions in the space domain. No other reserve component does that. So as I look forward to structure moving from the Air Force and the Air National Guard as well, I'd like to see it move, and I think it should move, into the Space Force so that we can recruit people, they become space warriors just like all the other space folks. They can have the doctrine, the personnel, the training opportunities of all other space warriors. So that's my recommendation as we continue to discuss what the Space Force will actually finally look like.
Good. Thank you for that answer. One other quick question, General. I know that the Guard does not historically submit unfunded priority lists, and maybe you just want to get the money you lost on the reprogramming. But could you walk the committee through what those would be for this fiscal year, if you had your druthers?
From an equipment standpoint or personnel, I have a, as you know, many of the programs in the National Guard are funded with ads from this committee. I think that future requirements for C-130 platforms are there. Future requirements for advanced radars for F-16s would be on an unfunded list for us. I think that as we look across other things that I have portrayed that are important, full-time support for the Army National Guard, additional money for counter-drug, additional money for FSRM to build our older facilities, all of those kinds of things are on my unfunded list. And if you're asking me for an unfunded list, then I can create one and give it to you on the record, take it for the record, and give a more accurate appraisal.
I would welcome you to do exactly that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Joe, I'm going to recognize Mr. McCollum in 1 second, but in my introduction, I was remiss. I met with the defense minister from Estonia this morning, and he was very complimentary to you and the Guard for the work as far as helping with cybersecurity. Also, I hate to say it in the gentleman's presence, he was grateful and thought it was a very strong relationship as far as the State Partnership Act with Maryland as well as the country of Estonia. So do thank you for that as well. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you some questions for the record on groundwater remediation of PFAS chemicals in the reserve component installations. We know the EPA still needs to adopt a standard PFAS groundwater remediation, but the appropriators did include $127 million to the FY20 defense bill to begin addressing PFAS chemical contamination. It includes $100 million specifically for the Air Force, as you are the largest user of firefighting foam that contains these chemicals. So I'd like to get a better idea of the scope of PFAS contamination on both the Guard, and I'll be asking the same thing from the Reserve as well. So I'm going to be asking you to give us an update on the scope of contamination that you've been able to record, what states are particularly impacted the most, if you're having any issues with the Air Force in terms of ensuring that the FY20 funds for remediation are available to the reserve component for this issue, and what you would do with additional funding if you were to receive it for beyond FY21 for the Air Force's environmental remediation. So I'll ask you to do that for the record. I have 2 questions. I'm going to give them to you both at the same time, kind of piggybacking on what the chairman was just talking about with state partnerships. This is important to many of us in this room. We care deeply about Guard partnerships. My state of Minnesota has been partners with Croatia for over 20 years. I was there when we welcome them to our state. It's a great relationship. The Guard also does an exchange with Norway on a regular basis. So it's important that we keep expanding state partnerships, especially into Africa, especially when the Chinese have deep engagement in that continent. So I would like you to give us an update on the expansion of the National Guard State Partner Program in Africa. My understanding is Ethiopia is the next country on the list. I think that makes good sense, having spent a lot of time in Africa. So that's my first question. My second one is just kind of if you could give our committee a brief update on how you think the National Guard can work with us as we deal with this coronavirus emergency. We're starting to see the impacts on public health systems. Last week in Washington State, Governor Inslee declared a state of emergency, which gives him use of the National Guard. I had a conversation with Governor Walz, the former National Guard member himself, and we were talking about, if the Guard was to be able to be used, nobody does logistics better than the Guard. And as hospitals are having to prep for ICU rooms with, strained resources, no one knows how to move things and get things built. So those are my 2 questions in the PFAS for the record.
Yes, ma'am. We've been doing a lot of work on PFAS, and I'm happy to give you all that data for the record, and we'll get that to you ASAP. Regarding the state partnership program, so it's 84 countries currently, and as you mentioned, there are a couple that are still there that are just now coming out to be filled. 2 of them in Africa, Egypt along with Ethiopia. will be at. Africa now has, as you may know, 15 partnerships, which is up substantially over the last several years. So I think that currently that program is funded in the budget at about $16 million, and what we need is about $29 million. So to make sure we have enough activity, meaningful activity between the states and the partnerships that are ongoing. I think that I just got back from a trip in the South Pacific. There's 2 brand new partnerships there that I just visited, Fiji and Tonga. As Parsi mentioned Chinese, and the hotel I stayed in had a Chinese flag flying over the hotel as I was there. They were thrilled to have the partnership. They were thrilled to have the engagement. The training and engagement with their state partner, which is in both cases is the state of Nevada, is a superb tool for our engagement in the South Pacific and in the region. And Croatia and Norway, the 2 relationships with Minnesota, have proven over time to be extremely valuable as well. So was that anything else on the state partnership program? That in the near term coming up is Ethiopia. They have yet to have a partner approved, and same thing for Egypt, although that is getting close to having a partnership. With respect to the coronavirus, so obviously we're taking that very seriously, and at the National Guard we're doing the things that we always do. We're planning, we are coordinating, and we're communicating. So planning means we're looking internally for us across the equipment, the personal protective equipment activities that we have, or equipment just in case some units need it, and there is some, and we do have some, should some National Guard units become engaged in a contact scenario with people that happen to be infected. The coordinating piece is working closely with the Department of Defense COVID-19 task force that is working with DOD, HHS, NORTHCOM, and all of the players involved in trying to assess the scope and scale of this activity and what it's going to require of us. To include looking across the enterprise for places where, should they need, there's housing available or ability to have people quarantined in states and the like. We're just looking at those things now. None being used anymore. We just finished using a station in Camp Ashland, Nebraska, where we had 57 people there who were being held till their virus was, or their quarantine time was up. So I think we'll continue to do those kinds of things, and the coordinating piece is, as we do, is where National Guard can be used, as you mentioned. Nobody does logistics better. Nobody does command and control better. Transportation. There are many, many things that National Guards can be used for in their states that can help governors and state and local officials deal with what might happen as a result of the COVID-19 virus. So yes, we are engaged, we are involved, we are communicating with the states and the adjutants generals. So far, Washington State is the only state that's called me and said our governor has alerted us, that said we may put people on a state active duty status for logistics and planning kinds of activities, but I suspect there will be more as this unfolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, General, I want to join everybody on the committee and thank you for 40 years of wonderful service to our country. But I see your wife sitting behind you, so I want to thank her for 40 years of wonderful service supporting you so you could do your mission and your family. I know that's not possible without their help, so thank you very much. As Chairman, I'm always pretty careful when it comes to these Guard and Reserve issues because I'm sitting to the left of the Kentucky National Guardsman of the Year for 1960 and a member of the Kentucky National Guard Hall of Fame. And then I'm sitting to the right of a 30-year Guardsman who was a colonel and commander to our forces in the Sinai. So I'm pretty careful.
If they were so sharp, they'd have Tahiti partnership program.
I'll be suitably humble in my questions. I've got two, one parochial and one actually my good friend from Minnesota just touched on. With some of the difficult budget decisions that you've had, We've seen a cutback on the MC-12 mission, which is an ISR platform for my friends that don't know. It happens to be one of them located at Will Rogers Air National Guard Base in Oklahoma City, the 137th Special Operations Ring. It's done really incredible work. I mean, great work in Colombia. It just provides a capability that we can quite often give our allies that don't have these kinds of platforms. And played an amazing role in a number of places. Some of them we can talk about publicly, some of them, quite honestly, we can't. But we've got a lot of great pilots there. We've got a lot of great aviation support units there. We've got terrific facilities there. So obviously, as that mission gets sailed out, because the platform is being retired, we're concerned with what's going next there, if anything. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, sir. Well, I'll tell you that I agree with everything you said about the 137th SAO. They're respected. They are a great platform. They have done incredible work in SOUTHCOM and AFRICOM in particular for two combatant commands that kind of beg for capability to do their jobs. The 137th SAO is an incredible platform. I would say that I think that there are funding issues, as you mentioned, the defense-wide review. They do a lot of the work for Special Operations Command, and Special Operations Command does fund the contract logistics support to maintain that aircraft. And in the course of this year's budget, they eliminated that funding for the contract logistics support. So we're in the process now of looking at going until we get that extended until we find a replacement mission, because the Air Force is short of pilots, and we need to retain the aviation skills of the people in that unit. So we're trying to extend to the point that we can, yet to be determined if we can. The SecDef approved that money to be gone. So we are working with the Air Force and with Special Operations Command to find a replacement mission for the 137th, if that's what it comes to.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and just want to flag that we want to work with you on that. Again, platform's one thing. The real essence of it, honestly, is the quality of the personnel in terms of the maintenance and the pilots themselves and what have you. So it's an asset, I think, from a personnel standpoint, as you point out. We're pilot short now. We don't need to be losing these kind of capabilities. Second question, just quickly, and you've already answered part of this, but this is more, I share my friend from Minnesota's concern with coronavirus, because I noted from working on the supplemental, I haven't seen anybody talking about how to replace anything we expend out of these accounts on that, or your facilities are slated for backup if we were to have a problem and all the HHS facilities got filled up. We don't know that would happen, but you would be pressed into service very, very rapidly. So I'm glad you're planning on it and thinking about it. I think you're very wise to be looking a little further ahead. I would just urge, Mr. Chairman, and certainly to you, General, we're going to have a supplemental at some point. I know we're negotiating it. My guess is there might be more than one at some point, because these things are just hard to anticipate given that it's a brand new virus. Please don't be shy about getting your accounts filled back up if we end up pressing them into duty, because we don't need to be robbing Peter and paying Paul here. We've already done a lot of that to you. Quite frankly, as my friend the chairman pointed out, it does not need to happen on this particular national emergency. We may well need you, but we shouldn't be taking other things from you, particularly as much as we're asking you to do. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And really appreciate your time with us today, General. And since this is your last hearing season, I want to thank you for your stewardship of the Guard, and thanks to your family as well. Since 9/11, our nation has asked much of your soldiers and your airmen, Guardsmen deployed to support Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, New Dawn, Inherent Resolve, and Freedom Sentinel. Over 700 Guardsmen's lives have been lost, 5,000 wounded in action. So we'll continue to rely on the Guard to execute our national defense strategy as we focus on near-peer competition. To be successful, however, our nation must ensure that our Guardsmen train and deploy with the same equipment as their active duty counterparts. And you talked about this a little bit when Chairman Visclosky started this out. So you said that you were not notified in advance that the Department of Defense would spend over $1 billion that Congress had already appropriated to modernize the Guard and instead divert that to the border wall construction instead. Speaking of robbing Peter to pay Paul, I guess I'll use that same phrase as Mr. Cole. What worries me, and I'm going to be very specific to my congressional district that I'm fortunate enough to serve, but our Air Guardsmen maintain and fly the older C-130H models in Peoria. And those are the, as you know, those are the Vietnam War era airframes that the active duty Air Force doesn't fly anymore. And the INGREA funds were supposed to have provided critical survivability upgrades to those older C-130H models. On top of that, now Congress has been notified that DOD will use the money that we appropriated to acquire new C-130J models for the border wall also. And I guess, General, the fact that you weren't notified, and I'm guessing that means that folks in Peoria, this caught them by surprise as well. And I guess I'm wondering, these are, you know, obviously very important people that we're lucky enough to have in our nation and serving our country. Just kind of what message you think would be important for me to take home the next time I meet with these folks about this. You had mentioned at minimum it's a 1-year delay in all of this, but kind of play that out a little bit if you could.
Yes, ma'am. I'll start off again by saying INGREA is a critically important source of income. Money, it's our only procurement source to upgrade some of our legacy platforms. It's the only one that we have. So what I'll tell you is, it's a unique source of revenue, of income for us to use because we don't have a program line for it. We only get it at the goodwill of the Congress year after year after year. One of the reasons they took it was they said, well, it wasn't being obligated. It wasn't spent at certain rates that procurement money is normally spent at. We never have spent INGREA dollars at 80% in the first year. It's impossible for us to do it. One, we never know how much we're going to get. Two, rarely do we get it at the beginning of the year, CR, so it comes late in the year. So we're unable to get it on contract and spend it in time. So it's not unusual at all for us to have low levels of obligation rates. But we spend all of it within the 3-year period. 99.95% is spent within 3 years. You can go back to 1994, I think, was the last time we missed it. And we just missed it by a tad, but 99 it's all spent. And that money, we have special, the Air National Guard and Air Force Reserve Test Center in Tucson allows us to not only buy things less expensively, but innovatively. We're able to work with industry for our platforms to make fast, quick upgrades to our systems that the Air Force, frankly, they can't do. Their acquisition system isn't built to do things like that. Only we can do it in the Guard. So all of the things that you mentioned, and it's hard to quantify the impact of delaying it a year. I don't know who's going to be flying a C-130 that may have needed that defensive warning system on it. These airplanes will still deploy. They will still go around the world. They will still be flown in combat and in harm's way. And does 1 year make a difference to some airman who's going to fly in that C-130 that slipped a year to be upgraded? Nobody in this room knows that. So I just, the many things that we have done to upgrade the C-130s at Peoria or the other 13 combat-coded C-130 units that are in the Air National Guard, it is a significant impact to us. And I've conveyed that to the Secretary and to the Chairman. And just be clear, they did tell me they were going to do it 2 days before they sent the reprogramming, but I was not consulted, in the decision of what pots of money to take in order to pay for the border wall.
So with 2 days advance notice on this, it's not like you could say, absolutely not, this can't happen.
Well, I don't have the power to say absolutely not, this doesn't happen. I don't control the money.
And if you had, I'm guessing it probably
would. If I did, I would have pushed back substantially on that. So yes, ma'am.
Thank you,
But
General.
very important pot of money. And my hope is that this was a 1-year blip. If it's a 1-year instance, then I would tell you that we're going to be able to recover. But it's going to hurt, but we're going to be able to recover. Take $800 million out of modernization, you're going to feel it. But the money came from things that were going to be important to the National Guard.
If it's a 2-year blip?
It makes the material risk worse. That is where I told the chairman, this is where I see there will be strategic impact. Just go back 10 years, you've given the National Guard almost $7 billion to upgrade our equipment. There's strategic combat capability in $7 billion in the equipment that we have in the National Guard. So if we were to lose it for a long period of time, I would say I might meet that threshold that the chairman gave us. So unknown, it's a hypothetical question, but it is very important revenue for us and for our platform and for the people who fly them.
Thank you, General, and again, thanks for your 40 years of service.
Thank you.
General, I join my colleagues in saying our profound thanks for your 40 years of service to your country, essentially your lifetime. We thank you for your dedication and your quality that you bring to this chore. Speaking of the C-130s, as you know, I've been involved in efforts to modernize your fleet and supported the procurement of 2 squadrons worth of 130Js over the last several fiscal years. I know that the basing process for these aircraft is being led by the Secretary of the Air Force in close consultation, supposedly, with the National Guard. Can you tell us the role that you and the Air Guard have played in the basing process for these 130Js? And do you feel that you and the Air Guard have been appropriately consulted about that?
Yes, sir, I can. I can't remember the month that it was, but it was sometime, I think, in the fall. We sent out to the field, the community of interests, in the C-130 community. Here's criteria that's going to be used to look at the 13 combat-coded C-130 bases that are out there. The Air National Guard was instrumental in developing what that criteria might be, as in terms of creating some sort of a matrix to determine who was the most valued or the most appropriate candidates to be looked at. The Air Force basing process always does that, and they will then winnow that list down to a smaller number. That list will be released sometime in the next month or two, in the relatively near term, from 13 to some lower number, 7 or 8 bases, most likely. And then each one of those 8 bases will get a team will go and visit those bases and take a more detailed analysis of each location. And they will look at cost involved to transition the aircraft. They'll look at ranges. They'll look at training. They'll look at the readiness units of the units there. And then they will compile all of that data that will come back into the Air Force process, which we are a part of as Chief of the National Guard Bureau and as a Director of the Air National Guard. Will be a part of that to make a recommendation to the Secretary of the Air Force of the primary and preferred alternatives for who will get the C-130Js based in the near term. So that's the way the process will work, and the Air National Guard is right involved with the total Air Force to do the analysis with it.
Do you feel like you've been treated fairly in consulting with the Air Force?
I do.
Now, these are Air Guard planes, right?
These, the planes that are to be stationed, that are out there, were bought for the Air National Guard by the United States Congress. They were ads.
And yet the Secretary of the Air Force is charged with making the decision.
Yeah, well, I think that, we're still part of the Air Force. We still have to operate from the Air Force. We get our money from the United States Air Force. So it makes sense to me that Secretary of the Air Force, as civilian control of the military, would run a process that's repeatable, defendable, and fair, such that everyone can have a shot at getting the C-130s. I think it is a good process. I've watched it for many years, and I think that it keeps everybody honest throughout the system.
When will the decision be made?
I think the 3 bases that will get C-130Js in the near term should be announced sometime this summer.
This summer.
This summer.
Thank you, General.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First thing, I echo your comments about moving the $1.3 billion from the National Guard to the border wall. Makes no sense. Secondly, thanks for mentioning the Maryland National Guard, about 500 in Estonia. They've been there for years, and I've visited them. Well, you know, it's a good thing, but you might not have voted for me, so I'm not sure. Or run against me. Yeah, that's even worse. But you know, Russia has attacked them so much, Estonia, that they're totally paperless. And as a result of being paperless, they're really working well, and Russia doesn't have as much influence as they used to, so that's a good thing. I want to talk to you about, we dealt with this last year, when you appeared before our committee, as far as the F-16, the Advanced Electronically Scanned Array, that ASA radar upgrades as a top priority for the Air National Guard. I'm pleased that Congress heard that request and added $75 million explicitly for these important upgrades. How many Air National Guard F-16s still require these radars, and is it still a priority to fund the continued procurement of these radar upgrades? If so, and why?
Yes, sir, and I thank this committee for the $75 million that we got last year that gave us 30 more radars. Last year I testified that we had 261 F-16s that I thought were going to need ESA radars as we proceeded down the road. ESA radars, as you know, the initial buy was 72, which only converted a few radars, 8 radars at 9 different locations. Makes it difficult to manage, deploy, logistically use these aircraft with different types of radars. You know, I do think that more need to be modified. With the 30 that we did last year, we're down to 231 left that don't have ESA radars planned. Now, some of those in the end game may age out and be retired, so we wouldn't probably want to buy all 231 radars all at once, because in the late 2020s or 2030s, some of those aircraft could be retired. But
yeah, they probably should.
A continued drumbeat of some 30 or 50 radars a year would be helpful to the
Let me ask you this. How do these radars keep the homeland safe? And are the older F-16s, you addressed it, without this capability still viable? You said you're going to retire some.
They are viable, yes, sir. And you know, they not only increase the capability of the platform to detect and engage threats that may be fired at the United States or fired at their own platform, but the ESA radar is a great detector. I mean, it also provides some significant defensive system capability for the platform when it has it. So it greatly enhances the combat capability of the F-16 when you put a ESA radar on it.
The other question I have, my district's home to the National Security Agency and the Cybercom, the 175th Cyberspace Operations Squadron, and on a recurring basis I hear concerns of the agency and military leaders about the recruitment and, most importantly, the retention of our cybersecurity workforce. What initiatives have you started to recruit and retain this vital skill in the Army Reserve? And maybe I should ask that question in the next round to your Army Reserve.
Ask that to General Lucky in the Army Reserve. We're doing pretty well in our cybersecurity in the Air National Guard, as we have a large footprint of cyber warriors. But as with anything, getting and maintaining and keeping our people is getting harder to do. So the ability for us to have money to pay retention bonus, re-enlistment bonuses, I asked for $100 million last year to do that. And keeping our talent is one of the hardest things that we now do in the National Guard.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. Good to see you. Like that term Texas associated with you.
Yes, sir.
Now, this, nobody likes what happened with the wall, even though I support it. I don't like it being taken away. And what worries me most from my association with Fort Hood is that we are always trying to be more lethal and more ready every time we deploy. And I know that sometimes you have a shortage of either training or equipment issues that are special to the Guard and Reserve. And I want to know if there's anything that's interfering with the lethality and of our force and their ability to be a deployable ready force. And if so, tell us what you need.
So, sir, I would tell you that the adjutants general, the 54 adjutants generals in the states territories, tell me that the one thing that is most important to them to build and sustain readiness in their force is the appropriate level of full-time support in our formations. For 4 years, I have attempted to raise the percentage of full-time force in our Army National Guard, and I have been patently unsuccessful. So, you know, I would tell you that, give you an example, a company of 130 people is supposed to have 4 full-time people. It's supposed to have an admin, a training, a supply, and one other NCO in there that is supposed to maintain the readiness of the unit, the readiness NCO. And in most cases, we will have 2 of the 4. And so it's hard to get people to take those jobs because they're doing the jobs of 4 people, so that when that company of soldiers comes in to train for the weekend, they have the right equipment, the right range of schedule, the right training, all of the things they need to be called ready forces. And so for 4 years, you know, we are about 11,000 full-time soldiers short in the Army National Guard to get us to 80% of what the Army says we need in this operational force that we are. And so I have asked for incrementally 1,000 a year, so that give me 1,000, I will show you how that builds readiness, and then you can fund the next 1,000. But it's not cheap. It's $100 million.
So what are you limited to right now a year?
What? Pardon me?
You said you need to recruit 1,000 new people in the Guard this year.
Authorizations to hire 1,000 full-time support.
And what's your authorization for right now?
Right now we're at about 57,000 people. 57,000.
But if you wanted to get 1,000 this year, what would we have to do?
Can I bring in a
Authorize it?
specific number? Yeah, we would need to authorize it and fund it.
So that'd be, put it in the authorization bill.
Right.
All right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General. General, as of this last week, we've been told over 2,500 Guard personnel are supporting Operation Guardian support along the southwest border. We've been told that it will extend through September of 2020. However, the administration hasn't budgeted for these activities. How long can you sustain these unbudgeted activities, and what's the plan to help the personnel accounts recover?
So, yes, sir, this is an important question. So, you know, of the reprogramming activities that have occurred thus far, one that hasn't is the ability to put back into our personnel accounts the money we are spending on the southwest border with the National Guard troops that are there. Last year, or this year, we will spend about $320 million currently coming out of our own accounts to fund the National Guard men and women who are on the southwest border. We need a reprogramming action, and we have sent to the OSD Comptroller a reprogramming action to tell her we need to get $285 million of that back from some other source, or the National Guard will be required to make changes to what we're doing, i.e. a drill in the Army National Guard costs $100 million. So if we don't get that money put back into our accounts where we can use that money for training, we'll have to cancel a drill weekend in September, or if in August, or in you know, the last 3 months of the year, if we don't get that $300 million approximately put back into our account. So it's that request is with the OSD Comptroller, and you know, I'm trying to get it over here before next summer, because the closer we get to the end of the year, the more I get worried that we have to, no notice, make abrupt changes to our training plan for the year.
You've heard comments from the chairman and from members of this committee about the transfer and reprogramming authority, as well as those activities, and I think we all have concerns about that. And I know last year when military construction accounts were raided, there were concerns about backfilling those as well, and I think that this body still has concerns about backfilling and what future behavior that leads to. What are you hearing from Guardsmen and women at the border operation itself? What do they understand their mission? What's their morale like with respect to this mission at the southwest border?
So generally, I think that I have been down there. It's been about 4 months or so since I have been to Texas and seen the actual activity going on the southwest border, but they are motivated. They find the mission meaningful. They enjoy the opportunity to contribute to the security of the southwest border. I saw no one there that, you know, and right now we have all volunteers there. We haven't involuntarily mobilized anyone on the border. So no one's being pulled out of school or jobs or away from families that don't want to be there. But I found, broadly speaking, they enjoy the work, they find it meaningful, and they're glad to have the opportunity to be there. And we have amended, thank you, the benefits that they actually get to have TRICARE activities taken care of and some 9/11 GI Bill benefits taken care of for these men and women. So it's a better situation for them than it was in the past.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the hearing. And thanks to General Langell for your service, for what you meant to the Guard. Our Guard's better as a result of your leadership, and I appreciate that. I'm a better congressman because of your leadership. So thank you for the relationship we've had. I don't want to kick too much on this whole issue of taking the money out of the Guard accounts, but I'm not going to let the moment pass, because I remember the days when I was jumping off of the back of an M60A3 TTS tank when the active component was training on the M1 Abrams. I remember those days. I felt like a second-class soldier, because I knew if I was called up, I wasn't going to be on an M60A3 TTS. I was going to be on an M1. It was probably even worse back in Howe's day. I mean, horse cavalry, I mean, they were...
I ask his words be taken down, Mr. Chairman.
But there is not a person sitting in this room today as an elected official that doesn't represent a National Guard unit that doesn't remember the day when we didn't train on what we were going to fight with, and how far we have come as a country. Indeed, going all the way back to 9/11, and we started plugging this National Guard and Reserve Force component structure into the war fight. We made them operational soldiers, and we promised them that you no longer going to be treated like that. You were going to be given the equipment that you were going to fight with. And so just count me as one of the people not real happy with the fact that we have made the National Guard a bill payer for this country at the expense, and you can say it's a year, but there's not anybody in here that can argue with a straight face that this is a one-year deal. And this Congress ought to step up to the plate and fight it, my opinion. Humvee modernization. How long have we been, I mean, we're in the middle of that right now. How much more do we have to go? I mean, these vehicles have been through a lot of conflict. They need repairs.
They have, and you know, we've had significant and regular adds to modernize our Humvee fleet in the Army National Guard over the past several years, certainly since I've been the vice chief or the chief. We've made enormous progress. So the ambulances have all been upgraded. The tow missile variants have all been upgraded. You know, they're in the process now of you know, continuing to modernize the fleet. The JLTV is a bit down the road, but to make sure that we have the right fleet. All of the ads that we get, whether it's C-130s or Humvees or NGRIA money, is critical to the force structure, the equipment, the things that we have to not just fight the war, but the things that we have, in many cases, to do our jobs here in the homeland as well.
And worse than that, in my opinion, it's the message we're sending to our citizen soldiers in our communities, people that we go to school with, shop with, worship with, these folks that have put their hand up like everybody else and said, I'll go. And again, we've made a promise to them, and we've robbed from that promise, I think. And the sooner we can get this money back and give some more certainty to our Guard and Reserve Forces, the better off I think we will be. I just don't like sending a message to them that we're going to relegate them back to second-tier status, because that's not the message we want to be sending to people that have, you know, you go in the Rayburn foyer and there's a whole bunch of names in there, And I promise you, there's a whole bunch of them that came out of the National Guard that are up there on that wall, giving their life for their country. So anyway, thanks for letting me rant just a minute. I want to pivot to Space Force. I think this is another oversight. In everything we do where the Guard is involved, we bring value to the fight. And I would say that we probably bring as much value, if not more value, to the potential Space Force as we do in any of the other components. We have that inherent ability throughout the civilian sector, and obviously we have guardsmen. In my state, as you know, I got a
153rd.
I got a
Intel Squadron. Yeah.
Exactly. I got an Intel Squadron. So in Joe Lengel's perfect world, how would this Space Guard be aligned and arranged within the Space Force?
Okay, so if you're asking my personal opinion, I would tell you that, I think that I spent a lot of my time as I talk about space trying to dispel myths about what we're trying to do. Some people think we're trying to create something that is going to be 54 in every state, territory, and District of Columbia because we have Air and Army units in all 54. That is not. There is no proposal from anybody to do that. What I mentioned earlier was, I have advocated at no cost to just create a Space National Guard in law so that somebody can be in the Space Force, in the Space National Guard of the United States, and the Space National Guard of their state. That's what we do in the National Guard. We're under the command and control of the state leadership. So that there would be a component created such that the space capability that currently resides in the Air National Guard would move over and be part of now the Space Force. I think that's important. The Space Force is going to train, plan, doctrine. It's going to have its own culture. It's going to have its own uniform. The men and women who are in our space enterprise right now are worried. They're like, hey, how come no one wants to create this component? And I say, hey, they're just trying to get it right. Hang on, they're going to get this right in the end. But they're, as people decide for whatever reason to go work for SpaceX or Blue Horizon or some commercial space entity, as people are prone to do, they won't see the Air National or the Space National Guard as a possibility to continue to contribute their military service. I think that's an important part. So ideally, when we have this component built at the same time such that, hey, the Title X force, they're already there. There's a Space Force, and they can just move them when the Air Force wants to. Right now, there's not a component to move the Air National Guard into a Space National Guard. So at some point in the future, I think they should do that. And so that ideally for me, they should go the same day. Everybody takes off Air Force, puts on Space Force. That's about the cost of it. I have people on my staff right now that are doing the space mission. I don't need a bigger staff in NGB to manage this. No states need any more generals to manage this in the states. The people are there, they're funded, they're paid for, they have equipment. We just need the ability for them to be part of this new service as the Space Force stands up. So I think they'll get there sooner or later.
I have one more quick question, and that is, while we're in the appropriations markup season now, and we have all these great ideas as to how we're going to get this done and get it done real fast and get it done on time, there's probably not anybody in here that really believes that we're going to have a conferenced bill ready to sign before October 1. So we're going to be on a CR. And that CR probably is going to be kicked into who knows when. What effect does that have on you?
CR always has the same effect it does on us in terms of what we can. It devastates programs that live on congressional ads, for one thing, like state partnership programs that we're going to have events and we don't get the money because we don't have a budget. That hurts. It hurts our men and women who, a CR, we all think it's a good idea that it ends on a Friday. Generally, they end on Fridays. Well, the men and women who are going to go to drill weekend on that Saturday, they don't know whether to travel to their guard unit.
They may be en route.
They may be en route. And all of a sudden, they say, sorry, we got it or we didn't get it. It costs us money because if we have to cancel drills or training events that we have pre-arranged contract to build readiness, things like medical evaluations, dental evaluations, or food support for major exercises that we were going to run, we lose all that money. And so that's money that's gone and we don't get it back because we can't change it. So it really disrupts our ability to train, and it jerks around our force. I mean, our most valuable weapon system are the 450,000 people that wear the uniform. And they, in these days with good economy and other choices, it's getting harder and harder to make them choose to continue to serve. So I don't like it when we don't give them predictability. That's what they need. They need predictability.
Absolutely. Thank you, General, for your service to your country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
How much we appreciate your being there, and there are men and women who are our neighbors, and we want to make sure that they have the resources, the equipment, everything they need to do their job. And so I really have some concern about this plan to cut vital aircraft upgrades. My question is specific to what is this going to do to the Guards F-16, KC-135, RC-26B, and MQ fleets, especially in terms of the Guards' ability to be ready, be responsive, and its crucial contributions to our joint force mission success.
So, ma'am, there's programs involved with, I believe, all of those platforms. F-16s in particular have missile warning systems that, because this money is gone, will either get deferred or delayed before they put it on there. The KC-135, we're creating systems that give enhanced situational awareness of crews in the cockpit. It gives them the ability to see planes and systems and threats that are around them. That will get delayed or deferred. Other things such as the RC-26 and MQ fleets, if I could take that for the record, I can tell you what those were. But many of these things are invented at the test center in Tucson, right there. And the ability to identify the need, to identify contractors that can take commercial off-the-shelf things, and we can integrate them into our platforms quickly. It all happens right there. So it's definitely an impact to the force.
Thank you. I just want you to know this is a personal interest of mine because of my district and our proximity to the border and how much we rely on this men and women for protection. So just know that you've got my support, and we'll do everything possible to help you out.
Thank you, ma'am.
I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if I need to yield any time to Mr. Rogers to respond to the Colonel, but I don't think so. I think there'll be later opportunities for that, right? General, you've heard a lot of our colleagues here. Thank you for your service, but you know something? It's genuine and it's heartfelt, and we all feel that way. So just let me add my voice to that as well. And I believe it was the mayor who talked about Space Force, and I was going to ask you about that. You explained it, what sounded like a really logical explanation. So if it's so logical and so simple, why is it not happening?
Yeah, sir, that's a good question. I mean, frankly, there's some, they want to make sure they get the Space Force right. That's what I'll say. I think, General Raymond has got an opportunity to look here, and, they're trying to investigate and see, can they create something that's even better than what we have now with the 21st century National Guard. And I mean, we've honed ourselves pretty well, I think, over the years. We very little resemble what we were in 1636 or pre-9/11. So I think they want to make sure that they get it right.
Is there a lot of communication, General? Because, there are a lot of folks that you have that are, in essence, private sector, right, that have a lot of expertise that doesn't potentially exist anywhere else. And so are they communicating with you, or are they aware of some of these special assets that your folks have that, frankly, nobody else may have?
I think they are. I think, broadly speaking, we have good support amongst the Air Force and the Space Force. Most people will tell you the phrase of, I can't imagine a Space Force without the National Guard. I think, but they're being careful, and they're going slow. And sometimes the Guard can be seen as a hard organization to work with. We've got states, and they don't understand it as well, so it's my job to convey how this works, make them see the benefits of the dual-use nature of our force, the ability for governors to task us for COVID virus or fires or floods or earthquakes or cyber. People thought when they created Cyber Force that you didn't want to put it in the Guard because there was not a state mission. Well, they have used the Space Force already to fight fires and to fight floods and to expedite resources and recoveries. So I think it's part of it's just beating the drum and making sure they understand the value in it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just another question about the 125th Fighter Wing. Carries, I think, a unique role, and just because of its geography, right, a critical national security role. Obviously, a lot of us want to make sure that they are equipped with the most advanced fighters available. You and I have had this conversation, I think, on more than one occasion. But just your thoughts about the prospects for the latest best fighter, possibilities of them being there.
Right. So as you know, the F-15Cs that are there are getting old and getting older faster, and so that the Air Force is in the process of looking quickly to replace them with either F-35s or a newer version of the F-15, EX they call it. And so the Air Force will go through a basing process, much like I talked to Chairman Rogers about in terms of the C-130H, same sort of mentality and methodology that will go through, and there's a lot of things that will make Jacksonville compete very strongly, I believe, for F-35s.
Okay. Thank you, General.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Womack got me all fired up there. And I just want to say that I've been here 18 years. Many of you have been here much longer than that. This assumption of presidential authority has been happening for the last couple of decades. And here we find ourselves in a situation where our appropriated money for our priorities that we pass through Congress, and you're not even acknowledged in that process, is extremely frustrating. And we've seen the diminishment of authority that Article 1 created so that the people govern the country, and whether it's congressionally directed spending, whether it's what members of Congress get paid versus the judiciary or versus the executive branch. This has consistently been happening. Here's the end of the road. And like the gentleman from California said, they already have money to do the wall. And the European Command was in here the other day and talked about 44 projects in European Command, and we're talking about battling against Russia and interference in elections and the drills that need to happen there and protecting our own equipment. And 44 projects in the European Command are not going to get built because of this. I'm upset, too, because we have, in the reserve, we have C-130Js. We put money in for 4 of those. Money for 2 of them are gone. And we're all dealing with this. And I just wanted a little therapy session here myself. If everybody else was getting one, I figured I might as well participate in it. And it's very, very frustrating for us who sit here every single day. Mr. Chairman, we see the threats from China. We see the threats from Russia. We see the complexities around the world. We see the Iranian enrichment in Iran. We see what's happening in Syria. This is what we do all day long. This is what you do. And to just have this money go out the door without any consultation to you or us is extremely frustrating. And so to kind of piggyback on some of the other questions here, we were talking about the Air Force and competition and keeping the talent that we need. And we know of the study that the Defense Department showed us that said the Air Force is hurting for about 800 active duty pilots and 1,150 reserve pilots. The shortfall is most acute within the fighter community. An estimate from the RAND Corporation states that the active duty pilot deficit will grow to 1,607 by 2023, and a report by RAND concluded that increasing aviation incentive pay to increase retention was more efficient than expanding the training pipeline to sustain a given pilot inventory. We know that there are, I think the estimate is about 30,000 pilots are going to retire from the commercial airlines in the next 6 years. And so we will be in direct competition to try to hire pilots and get them into the military. So can you speak on how you assess giving the parity in aviation incentive pay will help cut the long-term costs and maintain the readiness of the force, something that we're all very, very concerned about?
Yes, sir, I can. I think that the only good news for me in that story is you can be an airline pilot and a pilot in the National Guard. That allows us to retain talent and do it. With regard to incentive pay, I would tell you this: there's been a discussion which I support of. You know, when you're a member of the National Guard, if you fly one day, you'll get 1 day's worth of flight pay. This applies to the Army as well, not just the Air Force. You know, and I think that there's an argument to be made that you know, it doesn't matter how many times you fly in the active component, you don't have to fly at all. You still get your flight pay for the full month. So I think to retain not just our Air Force pilots, but our Army helicopter, our Army aviators, we should look at the way we can, and there's a bill here, but how do we get a full month's pay for, if you have the skill set to be an aviator, or some special skill that gives you an incentive pay, we should look at an ability to give it to you for a full month. As opposed to just 1 day. Some of it is the money. Some of it is people can be incentivized with affiliation bonuses to join the reserve component. Some of it with specialty pay and bonuses can be incentivized to stay. But no doubt in my mind that it does help. And we are seeing a lower number of people affiliate with us when they leave the active duty than we used to. We are seeing more people leave at the mid-grade captains and junior officers when their term's up than they're used to. It's just more lucrative and not required in some cases, and because we're an operational force, they're working harder. So we have to take every avenue to look across the spectrum to see what we can do to retain our specialty, our aviators in particular.
I appreciate that. Let me add my voice as well to thanking you for your years of service, and to your wife and your family for all of the dedication and commitment you've shown this country. You've been a delight to work with over the last few years, and continued success in your retirement. If you're like all the other people who were in government and now out of government, they're the ones smiling, walking around the hallways now. You can pick them from a mile away.
Yes, sir.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much for holding this hearing. And General, thank you for your service to our country. 40 years is a long time.
It is.
You don't look old enough to have served 40 years, but God bless you, obviously.
It's really 39. It's close to
Well, there you go. I don't have a lot to ask you, but even though Florida, and Congressman Diaz-Balart is well aware of this, as I am, we're the third largest state in America. We have almost 22 million citizens. But Florida ranks 14th in total guardsmen and 49th in guardsmen per state resident. As you know, when one serves as governor of a state, as I was privileged to do, you also serve in another role. You're the commander-in-chief of the Florida National Guard, in my case. And I've seen firsthand how important the Guard is. You know, how treating disasters, and, you know, Congressman Diaz-Balart and I many times will be together. We started out together, in fact, in the state Senate in 1992, and we've been through a lot of hurricanes in Florida and a lot of fire in the Sunshine State. And without the National Guard being able to help us protect our beautiful state, we'd be in a bad place. And that also extends to other states who will contribute, you know, some of their guardsmen and women when there's a natural, you know, huge disaster in any state in the country. It's a great partnership, and we treasure it. And so the concern I have, I guess, is that, you know, when Florida may be recovering from a disaster of any type, there may be other governors who might be somewhat reluctant to readily dispatch their guardsmen or women because they might have their own disaster to deal with. That's pretty understandable. So is there a way to get a 22 million populated state a justifiable number of your colleagues in a better way? Please, sir.
Yes, sir, and I'll tell you, we look at that all the time. We look at the ability. We have states that have structure that they can't recruit to.
Right.
Demographics have shifted, and it's incumbent upon us to look at that, to make the hard decision to move structure to where we can recruit to it. And so I can tell you that we look at that regularly, routinely, and states with excess capacity to recruit or will attract as mission comes up. So I can tell you it's something that we look at, sir, and I think it's a great point.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Should the coronavirus or another large-scale event require a national response, I fear governors will do what they just may do because they care about their citizens so much. So if you can help find a way to address this, it would be greatly appreciated. And I want to extend and associate myself with the remarks of my colleagues on this committee in thanking your family and your wife in particular for sharing you with the United States of America.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I welcome our second panel, the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force Reserves. I would encourage people to continue to participate in the hearing process. Our second panel this morning consists of the leaders of the reserve components, Lieutenant General Charles Luckey, Chief of the Army Reserve, Vice Admiral Luke McCollum, Chief of the Navy Reserve, Major General Bradley James, Commander, Marine Corps Reserve, and Lieutenant General Richard Scobie, Chief of the Air Force Reserve, We are pleased to welcome these four distinguished general officers as witnesses today, and while we thank each of you for your service, we want to especially recognize Lieutenant General Luckey and Vice Admiral McCollum for your years of service and wish both of you the very best of luck in your future endeavors. I will recognize, first of all, Mr. Calvert for any opening remarks he has, and then would ask you to proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interest of time, I'll keep my remarks brief, but I would like to welcome our reserve component witnesses here today. Each of you represent thousands of men and women who serve, their families who support them, and their employers who support that effort. Look forward to hearing from each of you on current operations training requirements and what Congress can do to help each of your services be more lethal and ready. Thank you for your service, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert. General Luckey, you may proceed.
Chairman, Ranking Member, Chairman, if I may begin by, and I'm aware of the hour, and I'll be brief in my remarks, but I want to, on behalf of this team, thank you for your service as well as the leader of this committee. And I appreciate the support this committee has given all of us over the last several years. Distinguished members, thank you for this opportunity once again to sit in front of you as an extremely supportive committee of the Armed Forces of the United States and the Reserve Forces of the United States. For the past 4 years, you've patiently given me a chance for a few precious minutes to brag about the superb team of motivated soldiers and civilians that I have the honor to lead, supported by their families and employers at home as we continue to press into the future, leading America's Army Reserve down the road to awesome. I know you share my pride in this magnificent component of the Army. On behalf of all of them, all of us, I want to thank you again for your stalwart support, and your genuine interest in our soldiers, their families, and the life balance challenges inherent in the calling. In the interest of time, and to get briskly to your questions and concerns, I'll keep my bragging short this afternoon. I've spoken to most of you many times about the improvements in readiness, warrior ethos, aggressive innovation that we have sparked together over the last 4 years. Much of it is reiterated in my filed statement, and I'll not repeat it here. But more to the point, no words can adequately express the depth of my respect or affection for this phalanx of professionals who bring such war-fighting capability to the nation at such a great cost savings to their fellow citizens. It has been the humbling honor of a lifetime for me to have been able to serve as the quarterback of this awesome team. As the Sergeant Major of the Army expresses it so wonderfully, this is my squad, and I shall miss it very, very much. I cannot overstate the degree to which your support of our efforts to resource key initiatives, whether it be in the advancing of modernization of this squad or in the interoperability with the total Army, have helped me as a lead sled dog for this team chart a course and set the tone for building and sustaining the most capable, combat-ready, and lethal Federal Reserve Force in the history of the United States. You've demonstrated resolve to reinforce our initiatives to train and field a squad of almost 200,000 soldiers who, upon very short notice, can deploy and fight and scale against a peer adversary has been essential, and it has been reassuring. In the end, readiness is the essence of relevance, and it starts with our people. In daily practice, putting people first in America's Army Reserve will continue to mean what it has always been for us. Our strategic challenge is to be ready enough to be relevant, but not so ready that our soldiers can't keep good, meaningful civilian jobs and healthy, sustaining family lives. Commanders at every echelon on this team understand that basic truth, and we will never take our eye off that ball. Looking to tomorrow, your Army Reserve will continue to leverage its Ready Force X construct as the way in which we will see ourselves, organize ourselves, assess risk, both risk to mission and risk to force, for the senior leadership of the Army and the nation. As the commander of this force, I assess that even though we have dramatically increased our readiness posture over the last 4 years, we have done so in achieving a sustainable level of readiness for the out years over the long haul. I gauge that fact based on a number of different factors and data, the most compelling of which to me is that the retention rate, the attrition rate of the Army Reserve is the best that it's been in 19 years. We press on into the future more ready, more lethal, and more determined to meet the challenges of our time, to win the nation's wars, while also well prepared to leverage our soldiers and capabilities when disaster strikes in support of our fellow citizens at their time of greatest need. Building this sustainable capability and infusing this squad with a profound sense of purpose has been an awesome ride. I thank you for your support, for supporting all of us on this journey, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Wisłowski, I wish you well in your retirement as well. And Ranking Member Calvert and distinguished members of the subcommittee, just thank you again today for the opportunity to appear before you and advocate amongst our men and women of the Navy Reserve. And it's an honor to be here with my fellow Reserve Component Chiefs to do what we do together is fight and lead our men and women so they can prevail in adversity. It's my distinct honor to report to you on Navy's reserves, sometimes and often we call America's Navy Reserve. Over 100,000 members in full-time, part-time, and on-call reservists in the IRR. With me today is my wife, Leanna, whose steadfast support through my career exemplifies what so many spouses do to support their loved ones who deploy, often with very little recognition. Also here is my Force Master Chief of the Navy Reserve, Chris Coates. And I'd like to personally thank him today for what he has done to advocate, to lead for the men and women, our sailors, deployed around the world. Additionally, I'd like to thank the thousands of employers who give up their employees to serve our country and a little bit of their entrepreneurial space to advocate and serve their country as well. Today marks the 105th birthday of the Navy Reserve, and on this day, like most days, our men and women are serving around the globe in some of the most austere locations. And again, I'd like to emphasize my thanks for this committee for the support that you've given us. The necessity of an on-time appropriations bill cannot be overstated because it provides predictability. And as we have met with many of you, and we know that the reservists are at their best when they can be predictable with their family, their employer, and their military obligation. And the modernization of Navy Reserve equipment, as well as systems, is critical to ensure that the reserve remains interoperable with the active component to be called to do the nation's bidding whenever and wherever it may so choose. This budget includes a funding request to transition the Navy Reserve pay system to a cloud-based, user-friendly, and on-time pay system. And maintaining Navy Reserve aircraft is essential to provide a lethal reserve, Navy Reserve force. And in the FY20 National Guard equipment report outlines Navy Reserve priorities for recapitalization efforts and upgrades in aviation, including adversary aircraft, the P-8 Maritime Patrol Craft, and the C-130 Tango airlift. All these are focused on providing strategic depth. I'd also like to thank you for your continued support of military child care. This budget funds an additional 5,000 slots for our men and women in their child care that will support the Navy. In closing, could not be prouder of our Navy Reserve Force. I know you can't tell, but it's been an honor of a lifetime to be able to serve amongst them and with them, and coming away inspired every time I see them combining their military skills, their civilian skills, and with the support of their families globally. So on behalf of the men and women of the Navy Reserve, I thank you for your support and look forward to your questions.
General, thank you very much. And before you begin, General, I apologize to you. I misintroduced you. I welcome you very much, General Bellant, and you may proceed with your testimony. I apologize.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Vislowski, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify on behalf of the Commandant of the Marine Corps about your Marine Corps Reserve. I'm honored to be here today with my fellow Reserve Component Chiefs and my senior enlisted 4th Sergeant Major, Scott Grade, who's seated behind me. The mission of the Marine Corps Reserve is to stand ready to augment, reinforce, and sustain the active component. Along with the active component, we have reserve forces forward deployed, supporting combatant command's requirements. On average, in 2019, Marine Forces Reserve provided approximately 11% of the forward deployed Marines for approximately 5% of the Marine Corps' budget. Over the last year, more than 2,600 Reserve Marines and sailors mobilized, supporting 45 operational requirements in each of the 6 geographic combatant commands. This is approximately a 19% increase in personnel deployed and 22% increase in operational requirements compared to 2018. Likewise, 9,944 reservists participated in 43 training exercises supporting requirements in 21 countries around the globe. Additionally, I'm pleased to inform you that the morale in your Marine Corps Reserve is very high, as evident by Reserve Component end strength maintaining a 99% of our total requirement. Not only are we attracting new Marines, we are retaining them beyond their contractual obligation. On any drill weekend, on average, 25% of the Marines standing in formation are not contractually obligated to be there. These Marines are primarily our leadership. Every month, they have a decision to make, and they choose to continue to serve and lead our Marines and sailors. I'm always impressed by the professionalism, competence, dedication to duty, and motivation of our Reserve Marines. Like their active duty sisters and brothers, they serve selflessly to protect our great nation. They continue to answer their irrational call to serve. The way they balance family responsibilities, civilian lives, jobs, schools, and careers is nothing short of extraordinary. I want to extend my gratitude for your efforts to provide timely appropriations and request your continued support of the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Appropriation. On average, the Marine Corps Reserves only have 38 training days a year, and that places an increased importance on adequate and timely appropriation. With your continued support, I can ensure Reserve predictable and uninterrupted training schedules to maximize personnel, material, and training readiness. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Vislowski, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to report on the state of America's Air Force Reserve. And I'm also going to discuss our fiscal year 2021 budget request. I'm joined today by my teammate, Chief Master Sergeant Tim White. He's the Command Chief for the Air Force Reserve Command, and he represents 75% of who we are, and that is our great non-commissioned officers. The Air Force Reserve is an essential component of the total force in the Air Force that provides experience and critical capabilities for our national defense. We enable rapid response, we supply surge capability, and we maintain strategic depth for sustained major combat operations. And we do so for only 3% of the total Department of the Air Force budget. We're a predominantly part-time force, however, we provide full-time support to the Joint Force. Our personnel participate in every active component mission and are both operationally integrated and interchangeable with our total force partners. The National Defense Strategy directs us to be prepared to operate in tomorrow's battle space, so the Air Force Reserve must be able to defeat adversaries across the spectrum of conflicts and operate simultaneously in all warfighting domains. Our airmen are the foundation of these efforts, and it's essential that we provide excellent support to both our airmen and their families. During the last year, we focused on accelerating our readiness, developing resilient airmen and leaders who can generate combat power, and reforming our organization to optimize our warfighting capabilities. And we've made significant improvements in these areas and are presently expanding our efforts to further enhance our readiness and our ability to support our airmen. We would not have been able to do this without the incredible support we've received from Congress. The National Guard and Reserve equipment appropriations have provided essential funding for our modernization efforts, and we thank you for past years' appropriations. The Air Force Reserve's full-time manpower has improved over the last year, but it's still insufficient. This increase is largely due to the conversion of select Air Reserve technician authorizations to the active Guard and Reserve billets, and the congressional approval of the direct hire authority. That enabled us to hire over 900 full-time maintainers over this last period. We've also been able to help ourselves, and it will help us in the future if we can expand this direct hiring authority to other career fields, such as our pilots, and that would also help us in our full-time manning. Last year, Congress authorized Air Reserve technicians to receive medical coverage through TRICARE Reserve Select. Beginning, though, in the year 2030, this is a great benefit. It's going to improve health care for our Air Reserve technicians and their families, and it's going to increase our retention. My ask for you this year is that we consider implementing this change in an earlier date. The Air Force Reserve is in good shape, and we'll continue to increase our readiness, enhance our capabilities, and posture our force to meet future operational requirements. We remain focused on critical, emerging, and evolving missions, including nuclear deterrence, air superiority, space, and cyber. We still face challenges, but I'm confident with Congress's continued backing, we can overcome these obstacles. Our recent successes are a testament to your support, and your backing of key legislation has enabled us to address critical challenges. And the on-time allocation of the fiscal year 2019 budget directly facilitated our improvement in readiness. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today in front of you and for your steadfast support as we ensure your Air Force Reserve remains prepared to defend this great nation. I look forward to taking your questions.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony, and would just ask a question of each of you as a courtesy to my colleagues, just with some conciseness and briefness, if you could answer the question. There was a $1.3 billion transfer from the National Guard and Reserve equipment account. Could each of you, again, just briefly but concisely, give us an indication of items you were looking to procure and the impact it will have on you in fiscal year 20?
So, Chairman, I'm happy to start. I would just say that I would bin it more in terms of capabilities than I would any specific item. As you know, we execute this over a 3-year period of time, and in collaboration with this committee and the Senate, continue to make sure that we are investing that money wisely and aggressively. The command and control systems to make sure we continue to modernize our capabilities and platforms for interoperability across the force. Bulk fuel distribution systems. Is several different aspects of the medical capabilities that reside in the Army Reserve. Simulators for training, light utility equipment, and then some fairly heavyweight engineering equipment, engineer support equipment, those sorts of things. As you well know, we use this account fairly aggressively every year to make sure we're continuing to modernize the force. So those are some of the capabilities that we'd be talking about.
Great. Edwin.
And sir, for the Navy Reserve, somewhat similar aircraft modernization, avionics upgrades, things that we do to modernize the capacity or the ability to be interoperable with the active component, as well as some of the fuel systems and distribution systems for our expeditionary combat forces that we refer to as NECC, and then upgrades for aircraft that we have that will give them more endurance capability and the ability to have a timing rhythm of the placement of the upgrades that I have suggested.
Mr. Chairman, first I'd like to start by thanking the committee. The Marine Corps typically gets on average about 1% of the total appropriation that's handed out to the services. But every bit of resource that we get is very much appreciated. This year, to answer your question directly, probably the largest program that will roll back a year or so is going to be an upgrade of an F-5 aggressor squadron, and that's typically avionics, as Admiral McCollum pointed out. But I would like to take this opportunity to point out to the committee that what the Marine Corps could really use in NGRIA is a wider flexibility on how we spend that money each year that you give to us. Specifically, my greatest shortfall is ICE, individual combat and clothing equipment, literally the body armor that the Marines wear when they go into harm's way. Right now, the way the rules are, I can't spend that money on Negria, and I have a significant shortfall. But within 2 cycles, even with that 1%, I can make up that shortfall for the force. So I just wanted to point that out today. And again, thank you
If I
for
could
the
ask on the rules, was that within the legislation we passed, or is that a department regulation, just for my clarity?
So I think it's probably a combination of both. It's the way the department interprets the legislation, but
Okay.
I can take that for the record and give you a more developed
So
answer.
the request would be to have some clarity to be of assistance in an issue like that.
Exactly, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the Air Force Reserve, our FY20 Angria fund was intended to target our critical capability gaps across combat systems, mobility systems, personnel recovery, and special operations warfare systems. Some command and control, some space modernization that we had going on, and some distributed training programs. And there were a number of modernization programs that were focused on the support for our 37 wings and 8 wing equivalents. So the loss of the FY20 Angria funds is going to adversely affect basically all of the Air Force Reserve modernization programs and approximately that we planned for FY20, and about 50% of the current programs that we are working with Angria will be delayed. So it'll hurt some of our capability, but I don't expect it to affect our readiness.
Thank you very much. Ms. Calvert?
Kind of going on what the chairman is asking, for the past several years, we've increased our funding for the military to make up for the huge readiness shortfalls we had. And so could each of us, or each of you, could you give us a brief update on your perspective on how ready our reserve our forces are should a large-scale conflict take place?
Sir, I'll start with that one. So as you know, over the last 3.5 years, Army Reserves focused specifically on exactly what you're asking. In RFX construct, we have increased the readiness of our early deploying formations. Early deploying defined in those of the tranche of forces that we would have to deploy into ground combat operations at scale. It's about 38,000 soldiers in the Army Reserve in less than 90 days. Early deploying formations are those forces that we'd have to get to in 30 days. We've increased the readiness of those formations just in the last year alone by another 9%. I will tell you that while the readiness has increased, as I said in my opening statement, significantly over the last 3.5 years, I will tell you that I think we've reached about the achievable level of sustainable readiness over the long haul. And the reason I say that is, as I articulated earlier, I continue to be very concerned about our soldiers being able to balance between their responsibilities to be soldiers, ready soldiers in the United States Army, their responsibilities to their civilian employer, and their responsibilities to their family. So part of this readiness equation, of course, is a function of time. So, but I would tell you, I'm very confident that we can deliver the capability required in time.
And sir, on the Navy Reserve side, the 2 dimensions of readiness that we track is personnel readiness and then readiness that's associated with their billet that they're assigned to. And one of the greatest enablers of that readiness is discretionary RPN, or the training dollars allocated to Navy Reserve that's above and beyond their base entitlement when that billet was actually bought. On the personal readiness side, we use a metric that's established by the Department of Worldwide Deployability. And in that metric, the goal is 5%, meaning 5% of the force, or said another way, 95% of the force has to be worldwide deployable. Right now, we're tracking 4.7%. That's not worldwide deployable for various reasons, and that's a good number. Our challenge is to keep it there. And then on the training side of that, it's aligned up as where the threat lies and how we maneuver the reserve force commensurate with what that individual training requirement is. So, and that's consistent certainly with how the Navy's looking at its funding, with readiness and wholeness.
Congressman, I'd like to begin by, again, thanking the committee for the support you provide us. I think probably the most concise way I can say this is, what we deliver are Marines. And it's sitting at 99% of our total capacity, our requirement, with 25% of that force being non-obligated, meaning that they decide every Thursday whether they're going to drill on Friday or not. If it's raining and 34 degrees, they decide they're going to drill. And so sitting at 99%, I would say to you that is a population
that wants to be in line to go and answer the bell in the event of a crisis. And you have provided excellent support for us. We're better armed and equipped than we ever have been, and we've got better quality Marines than we've ever had.
Congressman, as my counterparts here have articulated, there's two pieces to this. One is our personnel readiness, and our reserve appropriation is the thing that is my readiness account. That's where I go to make sure that all my folks have everything that they need to do from a training perspective. It's where I get them medically ready, and it's where I get them their Air Force skills requirements that they need. Our readiness there has been improved dramatically over the last years, and in particular, the things that we are interested in has been in our pilot force, which is now at 86%, and then maintenance, which we were struggling with for years, now 95%. So these two areas have come up quite a bit, and then the other one is equipment. With the equipment that the Air Force flies, both in aircraft and across the gambit, including in space. The readiness there has increased dramatically, and what has really helped us with that is the ingredient that we get from Congress every year has really helped us get the equipment readiness accounts where they need to be as well. There is a constant improvement that's trying to be made in there, and what we've done is we've prioritized our pacing units that the Air Force has, and our pacing units are up on the step, and they're going to meet, for the most part, the requirements of the Air Force to be ready for the high-end fight. And so all those pacing units which you've identified and we've talked about over the last year are on the step and ready to go. And what we're doing now is continuing to prioritize those priority units, and we're also bringing up all of our units along the way as we go. So readiness is at a high state, but we continue to work on that on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, I had the opportunity to go to welcome home ceremonies after deployment, a lot for the National Guard. But I've been at deployment ceremonies where I've seen one Army Reserve, one Marine Corps, one Navy, one Air Force deploying by themselves. So General Lucky, you know, we've got the yellow ribbon to support the Guard. So I was really excited about your testimony last year when you discussed the development of a smartphone-friendly application that would better assist your soldiers in maintaining contact with their units while between battle assignments, provide resources for crisis support and family help, and to help members organize their lives. Can you give us an update on the Double Eagle application and what you've heard from your soldiers and their families, how useful this tool's been, and more broadly, what strategies you're employing to reach out to soldiers and their families to ensure that they have the resources they need to be successful? Our reserve men and women cannot be forgotten.
So I thank you for that. And I first of all, I would tell you that we, like the Guard, in many respects, have large formations that deploy as well. So while I take your point, and I'll address it directly, I want to assure you that we have a yellow ribbon program that is a DoD-wide program. But the Army Reserve has an analogous program to what you've probably seen with Guard formations, and these are at scale. I mean, I was one in about a month ago in Anaheim, California, where there's 850 combination of soldiers and family members who may be deploying. In this case, all of them were deploying, but in some cases it's a combination of soldiers who are departing and soldiers who are returning, and we have a slightly different program of instruction in that situation. So I would tell you, first of all, I want you to be assured that they're not being left behind. This is a command responsibility that I take very seriously. As to the app, what I would tell you is it's better than it was when I reported last year. It's still not where I want it to be. I have specifically now tasked the 75th Innovation Command in Houston, Texas, which, as you may recall, is a two-star headquarter remission about 3 years ago, to get after all things future. In terms of innovation, it's in direct support to Army Futures Command, and they have access to and are now supporting this effort with some of the best app developers in the country. As you articulated, spot on. You know, the opportunity here for soldiers and for their family members to log into the Double Eagle app, get information, understand what's going on, and be able to communicate with other soldiers or family members in their communities where they live and work is a powerful tool, and we're beginning to exploit it and develop it rapidly. My concern with it, frankly, is it's got to continue to stay current so that it remains relevant for younger users. I mean, it's whether it works for me or not is not the issue. The issue is whether or not it works for our 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old soldiers and their families. So we're going to continue to stay after this one. But thank you for the question.
So I'd like to ask you the Army Reserve's role in the support of the Futures Command with the 75th Reserve Innovation Command. As you continue to support Futures Command modernization priorities, as well as ensure that the Army's reserve benefits from the best talent and skills from the private sector, I'd like to ask you to give the subcommittee an overview of the process in which you engage with the commercial sector. For example, how is the Reserve taking advantage of emerging technology hubs, not just in Texas or on the coast, but in the Midwest as well? And also, the government accountability was somewhat critical in a recent report of Futures Command about outreach to small businesses across the country. So what role does and can the Reserve and the 75th Reserve Innovation Command play in doing a better job engaging with the small business community nationally? Because I have sat at some roundtables and small businesses feel it's very cumbersome to be engaged and get through the paperwork and know what's going on. And then if there's any other Reserve witnesses that could provide an update on how they're engaging with the commercial sector, on how that would be helpful, especially from what I heard you say, sir, about wanting more and better equipment for our Marines.
So if I may just briefly, as to the Innovation Command and where we're located, the squadrons are, the two-star headquarters is in Houston, Texas, but we literally have nodes, and I'm just going to list off a few of them. I got a little card here, but you won't be able to see it. Everywhere from Boston to Seattle, as you'd expect, the Silicon Valley in California, Denver, Salt Lake, Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Kansas City, Dallas, Atlanta, Huntsville, Nashville, Raleigh, Aberdeen, Proving Grounds, Washington, D.C., Detroit, et cetera, et cetera. So this is I would say this is an ongoing effort to make sure we are not missing opportunities to remain very closely connected with the private sector. As to your question, and making sure we're gaining and retaining talent that is working in the private sector or other aspects of the public sector, but also remaining connected to the Army through America's Army Reserve. As to your question specifically about engagement with small businesses, I'll take that for action. I think I owe you a better answer than I could give you here. What I can tell you is this is just the dispersal of this force by its very nature and the private sector jobs that these soldiers have, I think lends itself to being able to do exactly what you're talking about. What I can't tell you today is how far that effort has matured.
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. I can share a vignette with you. So recently I was visited a logistics battalion. And within that battalion, they realized they had a number of Marines who were university students and who worked in the technology fields and who were interested in some of the current problem sets we're facing as we look at a future force. And so they created their own innovation space within the battalion. And so I'm sitting there talking to a couple Lance Corporals. One was on the UC Cal Berkeley robotics team, and the other one was a math teacher and data scientist by training. In the Marine Corps, there are mechanics. So in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, one of the problem sets we consistently were confronted with was a shortage of generator mechanics. Generators everywhere, a few people that can do the generator mechanics piece, and you got to fly them all over the battlefield at risk to the crews and to the Marines. So they decided that they could fix a generator with their basic skills if they simply had a recipe on how to do it, for lack of better words. So they went out and they bought an off-the-shelf virtual reality glasses, and they created an augmented reality program that they had me wear. I threw the glasses on it, and there on the generator is an additive reality showing the part, the belt that we were trying to replace, showed where it was. And then in the upper right corner was a YouTube video of a staff sergeant. And you click on it with your hands, you pinch it with your hands, and she would begin to tell you, now the first thing you're going to do is take the 4 screws off the door, and the 4 screws would light up in purple through your glasses. This was created by the Marines. But the fascinating part, and the part that I think you're after, is that when they did that, they invited local businesses from the region to come in and see what they really needed, right? It was probably a 50 to 60% solution.
And then other units often provide opportunities for local businesses who believe they have a capability that we will need, and we put them into the play of our tactical problems on drill weekend. So if you've got a drone that can deliver logistics, we'll work it into the play of our problem. It may be 35 degrees and raining with 20 miles an hour wind, and you can either do it or you can't. But they get a good sense, those small businesses understand at a grassroots level of no kidding what we need, and they are able to interface with the Marines, and the young Marines bring their talents to bear and can better frame the problems of what we expect to face in the next 20 years.
Right.
Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service. We appreciate you. We know it's difficult. I think those of us on this committee have a deep appreciation what you do day in and day out. So make sure you go back and tell all your teams how much we appreciate what you're doing. General Scobie, good to see you. The question I have, we were talking about transfer authority and all that, and how might the delay in fielding two of the C-130Js that were funded in fiscal year 20, and then recently were just reprogrammed to support the border wall affect the Air Force Reserve? Now, from my vantage point, and I have an opinion on this, that this is a critical safety issue. The C-130H models that my reserve unit in Youngstown, Ohio, utilize and that they fly are old and they're falling apart. Now, as you know, the H model line is shut down, so we can't get the parts that we need, and we are cannibalizing other aircraft in the process. And so the real safety issue for us is that we fly the aerial spray mission. And so these planes are very, very low to the ground. And my concern as their congressman is that we need to make sure that they have what they need to train on and to utilize. So can you speak to that issue that we're going to deal with?
Congressman, my opinion is very similar to yours, and our airmen need to be training on the equipment that they're going to use in combat and in support of domestic operations, and especially when we are supporting the American people. I think it's very important. I would say that the readiness capabilities that we have, in particular at Youngstown, are very high. They are old C-130H models, but they're doing a great job of taking care of that equipment. In the Air Force, we are prioritizing recapitalizing some of the C-130Hs with J models. And what I have done and have support from the Air Force is that the priority will go to our Special Missions Unit. As you know, the Air Force Reserve is the only capability resides in the Air Force Reserve Command for aerial spray, also for hurricane hunting. The hurricane hunters have already been changed over to J models, and the other is the firefighting mission, the MAFS firefighting mission that we share 25% of that with the Air National Guard. So those the special units that we're looking at, we're looking at the feasibility studies for where it's going to be best to put those airplanes. I can't tell you how much I appreciate congressional support in getting those. So if we, the four that were gifted to us from Congress, if we take two of those away, the four would be initial fielding for the units that where that would be picked eventually by the Secretary of the Air Force on where those go, although I'm sure she'll get a lot of help in that, making that decision. But also what's really important to us is that we fleet, and then we have to upgrade the entire unit there, which will be 8 airplanes eventually. If we stop with 2 airplanes, it won't help us to start at all. What we'll have to do is move those C-130Js into another unit that's like equipped. Right now, that doesn't reside in the Air Force Reserve. That would be probably in the active component, or there may be some guard units that have the C-130J 8.1, which is what it would take. If that is slipped, we can absolutely work in order to make sure that we field that entire unit. So if there's a slip and the 2 airplanes are added back later, we won't have any difficulty at all. But if there are only 2 airplanes, it'll just create a mismatch of configurations for the aerial spray mission, which wouldn't add any capability to our organization. So we want to make sure that we get the full unit fielded eventually, whether it's aerial spray or the MAFs, depending on how that goes. But we're happy to keep you advised of that situation and how we're doing.
Yeah, well, that's disappointing. I mean, obviously, this is a critical mission within the Air Force Reserve, and we'll stay in contact with you on it. But we appreciate your advocacy. I mean, we know that this is not necessarily something that you wanted to happen, or you wouldn't ask for four. But there's a lot of people disappointed about this, and we're going to continue to try to bulldog it and see what we can do to make it happen. Another issue for the other gentlemen on the panel that we're very concerned about is really the outreach with regard to suicide prevention. I also sit on the Veterans Appropriation Subcommittee, and so if you can just within each get a minute or so, tell us what you're doing as far as, because I know you all have pretty much implemented new plans. So if you can talk a little bit about that, I'd love to hear about it.
So I'll start. So first of all, it's great to see you again, and I appreciate the question. I want to be careful how I characterize this, because I don't want to sound like I think we've solved this, because I don't think that's a fair characterization. What I would tell you is, over the last 3-4 years, the suicide rates in the Army Reserve have been declining. That doesn't mean we've solved the problem. It doesn't mean I don't watch it very carefully. And it doesn't mean we don't continue to target as best we can those soldiers that are either unemployed or critically underemployed as best we can with our public partnership program to really try to help make sure they're able to find good, meaningful work again. As I've said to this committee before, one of my concerns as a leader of this component is statistical analysis over the last several years. We've found that about 50% of all of our soldiers who either have attempted or have in fact successfully completed a suicide were either unemployed or were massively underemployed in terms of, so that obviously becomes an additive stressor for them. And I would argue, and I'm not a psychologist, but I would argue that it probably increases their sense or lack thereof of self-worth and other issues that may be resident in the home and elsewhere. So we take it very seriously. I would say the biggest thing that, from an initiative perspective, that we continue to really drill on is making sure not only do we keep an eye on our battle buddies inside our units, and this is where, again, the app is going to be critical for us to be able to increase that connectivity during the other 28 days of a month. But it also enables us, again, to help better target how we're going to help our soldiers find meaningful deployment in their civilian jobs.
Interesting. Admiral.
Congressman, thank you. It's certainly a very important topic, one we take all hands on deck approach. We had 11 suicides in 2018, 7 in 2019, and we've had 2 this calendar year to date. And every single one of these we study and we try to understand to the extent that we can. The way forward, our conclusion, the way forward is stress navigation, as well as building resiliency tools for the member, and probably more, just as important, this sense of purpose and belonging, that as leadership, how we evaluate our leadership methods down at the tactical level. Do we create an environment where that member feels like they're part of the team and where they belong? And if they're feeling stressed, that we can pick it up and offer them these resiliency tools. So those 2 areas we're really investing in.
General.
Congressman, thank you for the great support from Congress. We've been able to participate in the psychological health outreach program, and that gives us 29 full-time offices around the country. There's civilian contracted, and then 2 other offices that are part-time folks. And that's made a difference. So since I've taken command back in September, I've looked at the data over the last 7 years, and it's all over the board. I don't think you can draw conclusions. In the last 2 years, we've had a decrease, but I don't know that it's statistically relevant over time yet. So to answer your question directly, I would point to our command climate and our culture. We take pride in the fact that we have a very intimate relationship between the leadership and the young Marines. We share the same hardships with them. They joined the Marine Corps to do hard things, so we do hard things. And when you do that, to echo General Luckey and and Admiral McCollum, it builds their self-esteem and self-worth, but more importantly, it creates a very intimate environment where we can observe them closely. And doing that and destigmatizing the challenges that our young Marines and sailors face, I think is the key in the future. You've given us great tools, but it's really about our command climate and our culture and the destigmatization of some of the problems that they face as young people.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yield back.
Congressman Ryan, do not forget about your.
I was going to let you off the hook there, but go ahead.
He probably wants to say more good things about Youngstown.
That's fine.
So,
I'll yield him an additional minute or two then, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman, and I have to say this about this entire committee. Every single either staff member we met with or Congress person, they have all given me an opportunity to talk about this. To me and my command chief, Tim, behind me, we take this personal. If I was sitting, or when I was sitting here last year, we had 3 suicides in the Air Force Reserve Command. There were 74,000 of us in the command. Last year we had 16. That is devastating, and that is not success. And what we have got to do is figure out where we have gone so far awry with our people and making sure that we can take care of them, because that is what we do. We take care of our airmen. We've been given so many capabilities from our elected officials to be able to provide care to our airmen. What has caused this dramatic increase over the last year. So we've taken a deep dive into it, and as we look at it, there are really 2 significant things that have happened in our airmen's lives. Everything that my colleagues have said it rings true for us as well, but it's financial issues and interpersonal relationships and relationship issues. So as we dive into these, the command chief and I have really figured out what we have got to do to make sure that our airmen feel connected and valued. One is, part of it is education. We need to make sure that our folks understand what healthy finances look like and what healthy relationships look like. And then if they do find themselves in trouble, they understand how to get themselves out of that, because that is part of what we've inculcated in our culture about how we do things right within our command, and that is about culture. And then the last thing is making sure that our airmen feel connected. 15 of the 16 were part-time reservists who were not in status, so they weren't with the command at the time they took their lives. What I need to make sure is that all of our airmen, and we've really tried to do this, and we can continue to do it at every unit visit that we have, understands that they're always part of our family. It doesn't matter what status they're in. You have given me the ability to bring them in, get them the health, and the help that they need and the care. Some of it's mental health, but some of it's relationship problems. Whatever counseling they need, I have the ability to get them that help. And what I need to make sure is they understand that they're always connected. And in order to do that, what I've asked for this year is I'm putting some full-time support in my organization. Some of it is at our standalone basis, and that helps with our chaplains, especially when it comes to counseling. And then I'm putting a full-time first sergeant at every one of my wing and wing equivalents. So there's somebody there that will always help shepherd our folks along, that there's always an ability to come back in contact. Because if we knew something was going wrong in their lives, we have the ability to help them. And if they know that they're connected, we can bring them back with us and try to get them that help, especially our organizations where geography is kind of the tyranny of distance between them, as my wife likes to say. But thank you for your question.
Mr. Chair, if I could follow up on this. So I've had a few conversations in the past couple weeks with some women veterans. They're very concerned about what they're hearing in anecdotal, and I'm going to be asking to get some information on it, with the uptick of the number of women veterans committing suicide. Could I ask you, do you have a gender breakdown of the number that you just gave us with your increase?
Madam Congresswoman, we will take that for the record, and I'll get that information to you. I do not have the breakdown in front of me, but I can tell you that it is that you are absolutely correct. I do have a number. I don't know what this statistically, if it's a significant number, but in the 16 that we've had, there are at least 4 or 5 that were female members of the command.
So that might be something we need. I think it's something we're going to need to look at, the way that we're doing counseling and outreach. Everybody comes back with its own set of challenges. We're all individuals, but it's primarily been a male-dominated enterprise, serving in the military, just as I'm in a male-dominated enterprise here. But in the military, when people come home and they're dealing with issues and things, especially the women say, you know, I'm supposed to kind of blend back in, and the pressures, the demands, and the expectations of what I do and how I can talk about what I witnessed, what I saw, is very different when they have a chance to talk to their peer support when they're with. But then when they're back home, they don't have the same kind of support. So thank you very much. I look forward to getting that information and working together with you on the issue in general, but for women in particular. Thank you.
Congresswoman, I look forward to that as well. Thank you.
And if I could, if each of you for the services could provide the same breakdown. I had never thought about it quite in that context, just to see if there's something there. And also, all of us share the concern and appreciate yours. And I appreciate the emphasis on working on the culture and stigma. So if people do, God, if you got a problem, please, we are here to help. So I do appreciate that emphasis very much. Just one last question for myself. I'll turn to Mr. Calvert then. I'd like to talk for a minute about the Innovative Readiness Training Program. It's administered by the Department of Defense, provides military training opportunity in the United States and territories to increase deployment readiness. The program also provides key services to American communities, such as healthcare, construction, transportation, and cybersecurity. For the current year, as you probably know, we appropriated $30 million in the budget for 21. The department asked for $13.1 million. General Bellin, because you mentioned the program in your testimony, if I could ask you, you mentioned units, it allows your units to increase readiness while making tangible, meaningful impacts in their communities. If you might address that.
Yeah, and I think this actually links a little bit to Congresswoman McCollum's question. So I'll give you two vignettes. In one vignette, we were able to create a tactical scenario where the Marines and sailors went in and repaired an airfield in Northern California. Huge success. And they finished something, they leave something behind for the community, and they are able to exercise their tactical task, and they feel good about that, right? The second one was relocating a village in Alaska. And the depth of the rewards that provides in our force. You know, they joined because they want to serve.
Yeah.
And they're executing tactical tasks that fulfill their call to service. So by providing this resource for us, you're helping us not only train the young Marines and sailors, but to develop that culture. You know, at the end of the day, our moral obligation is to return them to their families and communities as better citizens, better family members, better friends, fortified by their service, and this is the kind of thing that does it for us.
That's great. Any of the other panelists have a comment? Otherwise, I'll turn to Mr. Calvert.
Only thing I'd say, Chairman, is sort of like the Marine Corps. I find it to be a really great opportunity for our soldiers to do two things at the same time. One is develop and sustain their tactical and their technical proficiency, more than their tactical proficiency, their technical proficiency. And in addition to doing good, building a sense of confidence in themselves and their team, that they're genuinely contributing back to the welfare of their fellow citizens. And so I think it's a huge win from a retention perspective as well.
Mr. Calvert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an interesting subject. I always was interested if there could be a historical overview somewhat. You know, after World War II, I suspect that people didn't pay as much attention to that problem, but I suspect it was a significant problem at that time in Korea and Vietnam and certainly now. So I don't know if there's any comparisons or if, because I don't know if they even kept statistics of that in those days, but it would be interesting to look at that from that perspective. Vice Admiral McCollum, last year's appropriation bill included a reporting requirement of the Navy's plan to recapitalize its 2 remaining P-3 squadrons. What's the status of that report, and what's the impact of not buying any P-8s in fiscal year 2021?
Congressman, thanks for the question. First, from a strategic depth perspective, the Navy establishes what its warfighting requirement is. In this particular aircraft, it's 138. The Navy funded 119, and then we had additional 2 funded for the Navy Reserve. Last year, the Navy listed that aircraft on its unfunded priorities list, and the thought is it does 2 things. It closes the gap to the warfighting requirement of 138, and it can take advantage of recapitalizing these 2 squadrons, these 2 P-8 squadrons. We have one in Whidbey Island and one in Jacksonville, Florida. There's a human capital piece of it as well. So if you think about a pilot who's been on active duty and chooses maybe about the 8 to 10 year point to go to the airline, we really want to get a return on the investment. We, the Navy, have placed in that to the tune of $9 to $11 million at that point. If we can give them a place to continue service while they're serving in industry, as a matter of fact, in the same airframe, the Boeing 737, and get tremendous amounts of hours, that is great strategic depth value for our Navy and our nation. In every conflict that we've studied, that's been in any aspect enduring, the Navy and all the services have drawn deeply on its strategic depth. So we need, for that purpose, that's why the Navy Reserve is focused, and I've listed it in my National Guard and Equipment Report as my #1 equipping priority in pursuit of closing this gap, funding, recapitalizing the 2 squadrons, and building a human capital strategy to give the nation strategic capability with pilots.
Jim, we have no further questions at this time. One, thank you very much again for your service and for participating today. Admiral and General Lucky, especially yourselves, good luck to you in your future endeavors. As I told General Langell, as long as you're not coming back, I'm not coming back. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.